She had always loved music. Ever since she could remember, the soft hum of piano keys had felt like home. Every note was like a little spark of life, filling her heart in a way words never could. She spent hours every day practicing on the small upright piano in her tiny apartment, learning songs from books she borrowed from the library and videos she found online. Sometimes, she would close her eyes and just let her fingers wander across the keys, creating little melodies that nobody had heard before. They were just for her, a private world of sound where she could escape. Most people who knew her didn't understand her love for the piano. To them, it was just a hobby, something to do in spare time. She worked a regular job in a local cafe to make ends meet, serving coffee and pastries, cleaning tables, and smiling at customers who barely noticed her. She often felt invisible in the busy rush of everyday life. But the piano was different. It made her feel seen, even when nobody was watching. Every key she pressed spoke louder than words ever could. One morning, as she was wiping down the counter, a man in a neatly pressed suit walked in. He looked out of place among the usual morning crowd, carrying a slim folder under his arm. He approached her cautiously and smiled. "Hi," he said. "I'm here about a music event." She blinked, unsure if he was talking to her or someone else. He explained that a prestigious music showcase was being held in the city's main hall in a few days. Musicians from all over the country were invited, and the audience would include well-known critics, professional musicians, and wealthy patrons who loved to discover new talent. Most importantly, he said, the organizers were looking for someone to perform a simple piece on the piano. Nothing complicated, just a tune that would warm the room, something gentle and approachable. Her heart skipped a beat. She felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She had never performed in front of such an elite audience. Her piano playing was something private, a way to express herself when nobody was looking. The thought of strangers, critics even, watching her every move made her stomach churn. Yet at the same time, the idea of being recognized, of sharing her music with people who could truly understand it, was thrilling. "Do you think you can do it?" the man asked. She hesitated, then nodded. She wasn't sure how she would manage it, but she knew she wanted to try. He handed her the folder, which contained details about the event, the schedule, and the expectation that she keep her performance simple. "Just a short, simple tune," he reminded her. "Nothing fancy. The audience wants something easy to listen to." She smiled politely and accepted the papers, though inside she felt a spark of something more daring. The days leading up to the event were tense. She practiced the simple tune they suggested, making sure it was flawless. She polished every note, every pause, until it sounded smooth and delicate. She imagined herself walking onto the stage, sitting at the grand piano, and beginning to play. The thought of it made her nervous, but she also felt a strange excitement she had never felt before. This could be her moment. Every evening, after work, she would sit at her piano and play the tune exactly as it was written. But then, secretly, she began to experiment. She added small variations, little touches that weren't on the sheet. Sometimes a soft trill here, a gentle pause there. Sometimes she would let a note linger, feeling it echo in the empty room. She knew nobody would hear these changes. It was her secret, a way to explore the possibilities of the music without anyone judging her. The night before the performance, she could barely sleep. She kept imagining the stage, the bright lights, and the silent, expectant faces in the audience. She imagined the piano waiting for her, the keys smooth under her fingers, the sound filling the hall. She also imagined something else. What if she didn't just play the tune as written? What if she let herself go and played something that reflected her true emotions, her years of hidden practice and passion? The thought both excited and terrified her. Finally, the morning of the event arrived. She dressed carefully, choosing simple clothes that were elegant but not distracting. She didn't want to look flashy. She wanted the music to speak for her. When she arrived at the hall, she was awestruck. The place was enormous, with rows of seats stretching far back, chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, and a stage that seemed to glow under the bright lights. Other performers were warming up, moving gracefully, chatting confidently. Some carried expensive instruments, some had assistants helping them. Everyone looked professional, calm, and collected. She felt small in comparison. Her piano was only her own, old and familiar, but nothing fancy. She reminded herself to breathe. She had prepared. She had practiced. And above all, she loved music. That love, she realized, was what made her different. Others could be polished and confident, but she had something deeper. A connection to every note she played, a story behind every melody. Backstage, she watched the audience start to fill the seats. She could hear whispers and laughter, the clinking of glasses, the shuffle of programs. She could sense the anticipation, the expectation of something polite and simple. That was exactly what they wanted, but she had something else in mind. She had worked on this moment quietly for years, building up her skill in secret. Tonight, she had a choice. Play it safe, or let her music truly speak. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage, feeling the bright lights warm her face. The audience fell silent, their eyes fixed on her. She took a deep breath, feeling her fingers brush against the keys. She began to play the simple tune as requested, soft and delicate, careful to follow every note exactly. The audience nodded politely, as expected, some smiling gently. But as she continued, she allowed herself a small change. A tiny variation here, a soft chord there, almost imperceptible. She felt the music begin to flow naturally, as if it had a life of its own. Her nerves melted away, replaced by a sense of calm and confidence. She was no longer just performing. She was telling a story with her music, a story that only she could tell. The first part of the tune ended, and she paused, letting the silence settle over the hall. She could feel the audience leaning forward slightly, curious about what would come next. That was her signal. She smiled softly to herself and began to play again, this time letting her emotions guide her fingers. The melody stretched, became richer, deeper, more expressive. She added delicate flourishes, small surprises, and gentle harmonies that lifted the tune to another level. For the first time in her life, she realized that the music belonged not just to her hands, but to her heart. Every note carried her story, of years of practice, of quiet moments in her tiny apartment, of longing and hope. And as the music filled the room, she felt a connection with the audience that went beyond words. They were no longer strangers. They were witnesses to something personal, something real, something alive. And in that moment, she understood something important. Being told to play a simple tune was not a limit. It was an opportunity to reveal not just the notes on the page, but the depth of what she could create. It was the beginning of something much bigger than herself, a moment that could change the course of her life forever. Backstage, the room was buzzing quietly, but it wasn't the loud kind of energy. It was tense, controlled, full of people checking their instruments, flipping through sheet music, adjusting their clothing. Every performer seemed calm on the outside, but she could feel the invisible pressure in the air. It wasn't just a stage. It was a test, a place where talent met expectation, and the two didn't always get along. She found a quiet corner near the piano she would play. It was a large grand piano, polished to a shine, its black surface reflecting the bright lights above. She ran her fingers along the keys, familiarizing herself with the feel. It was different from her old upright at home, heavier, smoother, more demanding. Yet it had a certain elegance she liked. She could imagine the sound it would make, rich and resonant, every note carrying farther than in her tiny apartment. Around her, other performers prepared. Some were chatting in small groups, sharing jokes, their laughter light and confident. Others were silent, their eyes fixed on the floor or on their instruments. She watched them carefully. These were people who had performed countless times in front of big crowds. They had experience, poise, and polished routines. She felt the familiar sting of doubt. Could she really hold her own among them? Could her quiet, hidden talent shine when the stakes were so high? She took a deep breath and reminded herself why she was here. She loved music, and the piano had always been a safe place, a world where she felt free. Tonight wasn't about competition. It was about expression. The simple tune she had been asked to play was just a starting point. She had practiced it, perfected it, and added her own touches in secret. This was her chance to step into the light, even if just for a moment. A few minutes later, the event organizer approached her again. He had a clipboard and an air of gentle authority. "Are you ready?" he asked. His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried weight. It reminded her that the audience was waiting, that time was passing, and that every second backstage brought her closer to the moment of truth. She nodded, even though inside, her heart was racing. "Yes," she said softly. He gave her a brief nod and moved on to check on the other performers. She was left alone with the piano, the soft hum of the air conditioning in the background, and the faint rustle of people moving in the wings. She closed her eyes and imagined the hall, the rows of seats stretching far back, the faces of strangers who would soon be listening. She pictured herself pressing the first key, the sound filling the room, delicate and exact. She imagined how it would feel to start playing, to hear the notes resonate, to feel the audience respond. Her thoughts wandered to the years that had led her here. She remembered the tiny apartment where she spent hours practicing, sometimes late into the night, with neighbors banging on the walls for being too loud. She remembered her first piano teacher, who had encouraged her to explore her own melodies, to find her own voice. She remembered the small victories, mastering a difficult piece, improvising a new tune, creating music that felt alive. Those memories gave her strength. They reminded her that this wasn't just about a single performance. It was about everything she had worked for, every quiet moment spent at the keys, every note she had ever played. As she was lost in thought, a young woman approached carrying a program. She smiled politely and said, "You'll do fine. Just keep it simple," as they asked. It was meant to be comforting, but it also reinforced the instructions she had received. Keep it simple. Don't overreach. Play something safe. She nodded, smiling, but inside, she felt a quiet rebellion stirring. Simple didn't mean ordinary. Simple didn't mean dull. She had the ability to make even the simplest notes resonate with life. She spent the next few minutes going over the tune in her mind. She imagined the first notes, the pacing, the timing, the way her fingers would move. She thought about the small improvisations she had practiced in secret, how she could let the melody evolve naturally. She could feel the music in her chest, in her fingertips, in every part of her being. It wasn't just a tune. It was a story, waiting to be told. Backstage, the atmosphere was a mix of nerves and quiet confidence. Some performers were laughing, trying to calm their own anxiety. Others were silent, focused entirely on the moment to come. She watched a few of them glance at the audience through the curtains, noting the faces of those who had already arrived. The crowd was diverse. Critics, wealthy patrons, musicians, but all of them shared a sense of expectation. They had come to witness talent, and they would notice even the smallest mistakes. She reminded herself again. Mistakes didn't define her. Music was more than perfection. It was emotion, expression, connection. Every note she played carried a piece of herself, and that was something no audience could ever ignore. She imagined the piano's sound filling the hall, reaching every ear, touching hearts in ways words could not. That image gave her courage. The minutes passed slowly. She watched as other performers were called to the stage. Some walked confidently, some hesitated, some disappeared behind the curtains, their faces tense. She noticed the subtle differences in how they approached the piano. Some struck the keys gently, almost tentatively, while others seemed to command the instrument with force. She thought about how she would approach it, careful, deliberate, but with an openness to let the music guide her. Finally, her name was called. The organizer's voice echoed softly through the backstage area. "You're up." She felt a rush of adrenaline, a mix of fear and excitement. She took a deep breath, smoothing her clothes and walked toward the stage. Every step felt heavy, but every step also felt necessary. She had prepared for this. She had practiced. She had dreamed of this moment. As she stepped into the bright lights, the world seemed to shift. The audience was a blur of faces, all focused on her. She approached the piano, letting her hands hover above the keys for a moment, feeling their smooth surface under her fingers. The first note would set the tone, and she wanted it to be just right. She could hear her own heartbeat, strong and steady, reminding her that she was alive, ready, capable. She began to play. The first notes were soft, careful, exactly as requested. The audience listened politely, their eyes fixed on her hands as they moved across the keys. She felt the familiar thrill of performance, the sensation of creating sound that existed only in that moment. The piano responded to her touch, every note resonating through the hall, carrying a quiet power she had never experienced outside her apartment. Even as she played the simple tune, she could feel the music inside her shifting, evolving. She allowed herself a small variation here, a gentle pause there, a subtle change in tempo. The audience noticed, though they did not yet fully understand. There was something in the way the melody now flowed, something that felt alive, personal, real. She smiled quietly to herself, knowing that the tune was beginning to tell a story beyond its written notes. She kept playing, letting the music guide her. Each note, each chord, became a conversation between herself and the audience. She could sense their curiosity, their attention, the subtle shift from polite listening to engagement. The simple tune had become more than a tune. It was becoming her voice, a way to speak without words. And in that moment, backstage and on stage, she realized that being told to play something simple wasn't a limitation. It was an opportunity to show that music was more than notes on a page. It was emotion, expression, and connection. She had prepared for this, and now, in the quiet tension of the hall, she felt ready to let the music take its own path, to guide her and the audience together. She took a deep breath as the first notes of the simple tune flowed from her fingers. The sound was soft at first, gentle and careful, exactly as the organizers had asked. She felt the audience leaning in slightly, listening politely, expecting nothing more than a short, pleasant performance. That was fine. She needed their attention before she could do what she had planned next. At first, she played exactly as written, each note deliberate, each pause precise. She felt the familiar rhythm in her fingers, the memory of years of practice guiding her hands. The hall was quiet, almost reverent, as if everyone knew something important was about to happen. She could feel the energy of the room, the anticipation in the air. Every eye was on her, every ear tuned to the piano. Then, almost without thinking, she added a small variation. A subtle trill here, a slight delay there, just enough to make the music feel alive. She watched the audience closely. Some were shifting in their seats, others had their heads tilted slightly, listening harder, trying to catch what was changing. They didn't know it yet, but the simple tune was starting to grow into something more. Her heart raced, but in a calm, controlled way. She let her emotions guide her fingers, letting the melody flow naturally. She didn't think about mistakes or judgment. She thought only about the music and the story it was telling. Each note became a word, each chord a sentence, and slowly, the simple tune was becoming a story only she could tell. The audience began to respond, though not in the loud, obvious ways of clapping or cheering. Instead, there were small movements, a shift in posture, a quiet inhale, a glance toward the stage. People were leaning forward without realizing it, drawn in by the subtle complexity emerging from the simplicity of the tune. She could feel their curiosity, their attention, and it gave her courage to keep going. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the music take over completely. Her fingers moved with confidence now, exploring the keys with precision and emotion. She added gentle flourishes, small chords that rose and fell like waves, carrying the melody forward. The simple tune was no longer just simple. It had grown into something alive, something with depth and feeling. For the first time, she felt a connection with the audience that went beyond the polite listening they had started with. They were no longer just observers. They were part of the music. Each note she played seemed to reach out to them, tugging at something inside, stirring emotions they may not have expected to feel. She could see it in their faces, soft expressions, quiet smiles, eyes widening slightly as they absorbed the sounds. She didn't stop to think about what she was doing. The music carried her forward, each section flowing naturally into the next. She let herself be led by her emotions, by the memories of hours spent practicing in a quiet apartment, by the joy she felt when a note resonated perfectly. The piano was no longer an instrument. It was a part of her, a voice through which she could speak freely. As she continued, she introduced more subtle variations. She added harmonies that lifted the melody, soft arpeggios that danced between the main notes, and gentle pauses that allowed the sound to breathe. The audience was completely captivated now, leaning in, listening with rapt attention. Some faces showed surprise, others wonder, and a few were close to tears. They hadn't expected this depth, this richness, from what had started as a simple tune. She felt a thrill of excitement. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment where her hidden talent could shine without limits. The simple tune had been a key, unlocking something much greater, something she had kept private for years. She let herself explore every possibility, every variation, every nuance. The piano became an extension of her emotions, each note a reflection of her thoughts, her fears, her hopes, her joy. Time seemed to slow as she played. She wasn't thinking about the minutes passing or the length of the performance. She wasn't worried about judgment or perfection. She was fully present in the music, and the audience felt it. She could see subtle changes in their expressions, the way they leaned closer, the way their eyes sparkled with attention. She realized that music, when played with sincerity and passion, had a power far greater than she had imagined. Her hands moved faster now, more confidently. The melody soared, rising and falling with emotion, weaving in unexpected chords and soft embellishments. She added gentle crescendos, letting the sound swell and fill the hall, then faded into quiet, delicate moments that made the audience hold their breath. Each shift in the music was intentional, but it also felt natural, as if it had been waiting to be played all along. The simple tune had transformed completely. It was no longer what it had been on paper. It had become a living, breathing story, one that could only exist in that moment, in that hall with those people listening. She felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had shared something deeply personal, something that could not be replicated or copied. The audience was completely silent now, caught in the magic of the music. They were not thinking about critics or judgment, about money or fame. They were just listening, feeling the notes, experiencing the emotion she poured into every key. She could sense their hearts beating in time with the melody, their attention fixed entirely on the story unfolding before them. She paused briefly, letting a final note linger in the air, and then continued. The music grew even more expressive, rising to heights that surprised even her. She didn't want to stop. She wanted to see how far she could take it, how deeply she could reach the hearts of those listening. The simple tune had become a canvas, and she was painting with sound, with emotion, with everything she had inside. By now, the audience was visibly moved. Some leaned forward, some closed their eyes, some held their breath as if afraid to interrupt the flow of the music. She could feel the connection between herself and the crowd, a silent understanding that music could speak in ways words never could. Every note she played seemed to echo in their hearts, each pause a moment for reflection, each chord a spark of emotion. Her confidence grew with every measure. She could feel the music guiding her, leading her hands, inspiring her creativity. She was no longer worried about playing correctly or following instructions. She was fully immersed in the moment, letting the simple tune evolve into a performance that was uniquely hers. As she reached the final section, she slowed slightly, letting the notes become gentle again, returning to the simplicity that had started it all. But now, even the simplest notes carried depth, emotion, and beauty. The audience could sense it, and their response was immediate. A quiet, almost reverent attention that made her feel both nervous and proud. Finally, she played the last note. It lingered in the hall for a moment, echoing softly, and then silence fell. The audience held their breath, not moving, not applauding, as if trying to savor the moment for just a little longer. She let her hands rest on the keys, feeling the music fade, feeling the connection she had created. Then, slowly, the applause began. At first, it was soft, polite, but it grew quickly, filling the hall with sound. People were on their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears from their eyes. She felt a mixture of relief, joy, and disbelief. The simple tune had not just met the expectations. It had exceeded them in ways she never imagined. She looked up and saw the audience smiling, leaning forward, clearly moved by what they had just witnessed. Critics and patrons alike were whispering to each other, impressed by the depth and emotion she had brought to the stage. She realized in that moment that music was more than technique or notes. It was connection, expression, and heart. The simple tune had been her opportunity, and she had turned it into a masterpiece. She had not only played the notes, they had played her as well, guiding her to a performance that was honest, powerful, and unforgettable. And as she took a deep bow, she knew this was only the beginning of something much larger. The applause was still echoing through the hall, but she didn't move immediately. She stayed at the piano, letting the sound of the crowd wash over her. It was overwhelming and exhilarating all at once. She could feel the energy of the room, the way the audience's attention had shifted from polite curiosity to something much deeper. Every face she could see, even from a distance, reflected awe, wonder, and emotion. She looked down at the keys beneath her fingers, and for a moment, it felt like the piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a bridge, a channel connecting her heart directly to the people sitting in the audience. She could feel their focus, their anticipation, their hunger for more. Something inside her stirred, a quiet but undeniable urge to take the music further, to let it flow even more freely. Her hands hovered over the keys, not moving yet, listening to the silence that had replaced the applause. It wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was a waiting silence, like the room itself was holding its breath. She could almost feel the curiosity in the air, the way every person in that hall was waiting to see what she would do next. That pause was a gift, a moment to decide how far she wanted to take this. Then she began to play again. This time, she didn't just return to the original tune. She let the music grow organically, expanding beyond the simplicity that had been requested. The melody became richer, more intricate, weaving through the air like a story unfolding in real time. She added small improvisations, subtle harmonies that made the sound fuller, and unexpected chords that caught the audience by surprise. The room seemed to shift with every note, the energy rising with the music itself. She could sense the change immediately. The audience was no longer sitting quietly, politely listening. They were leaning forward, eyes widening, breath catching as the music pulled them in deeper. Some faces showed astonishment, others a gentle smile, and a few were almost trembling with emotion. They were witnessing something rare, something unplanned and alive, and she felt that more clearly than ever. Her confidence grew with each measure. The music was no longer just about playing a tune correctly. It was about expression, emotion, and connection. The applause seemed endless, yet she stood quietly for a moment, letting it wash over her. Her chest was tight with exhilaration, and her fingers tingled from the performance. It was as if every note she had played had left a trace of her spirit in the air. The audience wasn't just responding to the music, they were responding to her, to the honesty and emotion she had poured into every key. As the clapping continued, she felt a mix of disbelief and pride. She had expected polite applause, maybe a few smiles, perhaps some nods of approval. What she had received was something far beyond that. The hall was alive with appreciation, energy, and awe. People were standing, cheering, some whispering to each other in astonishment. Critics, patrons, and fellow performers alike were clearly moved. She could see it in their faces, the surprise, the admiration, the respect. For a moment, she let herself soak it in. She remembered the years of quiet practice, the nights alone at her piano, the small apartment where no one had listened except the walls. She had always wondered if anyone would ever understand what she could do, if anyone would ever see the depth of her music. And now, here it was, the room full of people witnessing something deeply personal, something alive. Backstage, a few other performers had paused in their preparations to watch her. Their expressions were a mix of amazement and curiosity. They had been expecting a simple tune, a polite, brief performance, and what they had witnessed was something entirely different. She could sense their admiration, and it filled her with quiet satisfaction. She wasn't performing to compete. She was performing to express herself, and that honesty had spoken louder than technique or polish ever could. The applause eventually began to settle, and she finally lowered her hands from the piano. The audience was still clapping, some standing, some wiping tears from their eyes. She could hear soft murmurs of awe, whispers about the unexpected depth, the beauty, the emotion. She realized that she had not just played notes. She had shared a part of herself. And in doing so, she had created something unforgettable. A few members of the audience approached as she left the stage. Their words were kind, full of admiration. "That was incredible," one person said, smiling warmly. "We weren't expecting that depth. You've moved us all." Another nodded, eyes wide. "You have such talent. Thank you for sharing it with us." She smiled politely, quietly overwhelmed, her heart still racing from the performance. She had been prepared for simple praise, not this level of reaction. As she walked through the hall, the organizers met her with excited expressions. "That was beyond what we imagined," one of them said. "You didn't just play a simple tune, you transformed it. The audience is talking about it. They're captivated." She nodded, trying to contain her excitement. It felt strange to hear such high praise, but she allowed herself a small smile. She had taken a risk and it had paid off. Later, in a quieter room backstage, she reflected on the performance. Her mind replayed every moment, the first hesitant notes, the growing confidence, the way the melody had expanded, and the audience's reactions. She realized that this was the first time she had truly performed not just for others, but for herself. She had let the music guide her, let her emotions flow, and in doing so, she had created something beyond expectation. She also realized that the performance had changed something inside her. Before, she had always been careful, almost cautious, letting her talent stay hidden. She had practiced in private, afraid to show the world what she could do. But now, she had stepped into the light, taken a risk, and discovered that her music had the power to move people. That understanding brought a sense of freedom she had never felt before. As she prepared to leave the hall, she noticed a few people waiting to speak with her individually. They weren't just ordinary audience members, they were patrons, musicians, and critics who had clearly been impressed. They asked questions about her training, her inspirations, and her future plans. She answered humbly, still amazed at the attention. For the first time, she realized that her music could open doors, connect her to people, and perhaps even change the course of her life. Walking through the emptying hall afterward, she felt a quiet sense of triumph. The performance had been more than she could have imagined. She had started with a simple tune, and yet she had ended with something profound, something that resonated deeply with everyone who had been listening. It was a reminder that even the simplest beginnings could lead to extraordinary outcomes if approached with honesty and passion. Later that evening, she returned to her small apartment. The quiet was different now. It was no longer just a space for private practice. It felt like a place where dreams could take shape. She sat at her piano, running her fingers over the keys, and for a moment, she played just for herself. The music was softer now, reflective, filled with gratitude and quiet joy. She thought about the audience, their faces, their reactions, and she smiled. She had shared a part of herself, and it had been received with love. Over the next few days, she began receiving messages, emails, and calls from people who had attended the performance. Many expressed amazement, admiration, and curiosity. Some were professional musicians, offering encouragement or even opportunities. Others were patrons, eager to hear more or invite her to perform at future events. She felt a mix of humility and excitement. Her music was making connections, building recognition, and opening doors she had never imagined. Despite the attention, she remained grounded. She understood that the performance was not just about recognition or praise. It was about connection, expression, and the joy of sharing something deeply personal. She continued to practice, to explore new melodies, and to experiment with the piano in ways that felt natural. The experience had given her confidence, but also a deeper understanding of what music could achieve. She also began to reflect on her own journey. She remembered the years of quiet, private practice, the small victories, the late nights, and the moments of doubt. All of those experiences had prepared her for this moment. They had given her skill, patience, and resilience. Most importantly, they had nurtured a love for music that was pure and undiluted. And that love had been what carried her through the performance, what allowed her to command the stage and connect with the audience in ways words could never describe. Friends and family, once skeptical of her quiet dedication, began to understand the depth of her talent. They saw how her music could move people, how her performances could create moments of beauty and emotion. Their pride and support strengthened her resolve to continue, to explore her abilities further, and to share her music more boldly with the world. The event itself became a turning point. What had started as a request to play a simple tune had transformed into a breakthrough moment in her life. People who had been present talked about her performance for weeks afterward. Critics praised her subtle yet powerful expression. Fellow performers admired her courage and creativity. And she herself felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond applause. It was the knowledge that she had tapped into something real, meaningful, and unforgettable. In the weeks that followed, she was invited to perform at other events, both small and large. Every invitation reminded her of the power of authenticity, the importance of letting passion guide action, and the rewards of taking risks. Each performance was different, each audience unique, but the core remained the same. Music was a language of connection, and she was becoming fluent. Through it all, she remained humble. She remembered the simple tune that had started it all, the quiet apartment where she had first discovered her love for the piano, and the feeling of invisible walls around her talent. She realized that success wasn't just about recognition. It was about staying true to her art, embracing the journey, and sharing her music with sincerity and courage. Every time she sat at the piano now, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't just play notes. She told stories, expressed emotions, and created moments that could touch others deeply. The simple tune had been the spark, but her talent, dedication, and heart had transformed it into something unforgettable. And as she continued to play, she understood that this was only the beginning. There would be more performances, more challenges, more opportunities to grow. But she also knew that she had discovered something profound within herself. A voice that could command attention, move hearts, and leave a lasting impression. That understanding gave her confidence, joy, and a sense of limitless possibility. The applause, the admiration, the doors opening. It all felt surreal, yet it was real. She had started with something simple, followed her instincts, and let her heart guide her fingers. And in doing so, she had not only transformed a simple tune but had transformed herself. After the applause had settled and the hall had emptied, she remained at the piano for a few quiet moments. Her fingers rested lightly on the keys, not moving, as if the instrument itself had been a portal into a world where only music and emotion existed. The energy from the audience lingered in the air, invisible yet palpable, like a soft hum surrounding her. It was a moment of stillness she knew she would remember forever. She thought about the journey that had led her here. It had started with a simple tune, a modest request to play something easy, something expected. No one had asked for brilliance. No one had anticipated the performance that had just unfolded. And yet, in that simplicity, she had found her voice. The music had carried her, guiding her fingers, her emotions, and ultimately, the hearts of everyone listening. The experience had changed her, in ways subtle yet profound. She realized she had crossed a threshold, from uncertainty and caution to confidence and courage. She had discovered that her talent was more than technique. It was expression, connection, and the power to move people deeply. That understanding filled her with both pride and humility. Pride in what she could achieve, humility in recognizing that the music itself was what truly commanded attention. In the following days, messages continued to pour in. Some were from people who had attended the performance, expressing their amazement. Others were from strangers who had heard about it through word of mouth or recordings, curious to know more about the pianist who had turned a simple tune into something unforgettable. She responded quietly, with gratitude and humility, still a little overwhelmed by the attention. Among these messages were opportunities she had never imagined. Invitations to perform at concerts, private events, and even recordings. Professional musicians reached out, hoping to collaborate or simply to meet her. Every offer was a reminder of how far a single performance could reach when it came from the heart. She felt a sense of responsibility now, responsibility to herself, to her music, and to the people who had been touched by her performance. Despite the excitement, she stayed grounded. She understood that every performance, every opportunity, was a chance to connect with others through music, not just to gain recognition. She continued to practice daily, exploring new melodies, experimenting with variations, and refining her skills. Each practice session was not about perfection, but about honesty, passion, and emotional expression. She wanted every note she played to carry meaning, to be felt by anyone listening. One afternoon, she found herself back at the same hall where she had first performed. It was empty, quiet, with the faint scent of polished wood and echoes of past performances. She sat at the piano, hands hovering over the keys, and began to play. The notes flowed effortlessly, soft at first, then gradually building in intensity. She experimented with a melody she had never played in public, feeling the music guide her. It was a private moment, a reminder that her connection with the piano was personal before it was public. As the days turned into weeks, she noticed how much confidence she had gained. The nervousness she had once felt before performing had diminished, replaced by a calm excitement. She knew she could take risks, improvise, and let her emotions guide her without fear. The audience, whenever she performed, responded not just to the notes but to the sincerity behind them. She understood now that the true power of music lay in honesty, in the courage to show vulnerability, and in the ability to communicate without words. Her life began to shift in small but meaningful ways. People she met recognized her talent, often before she even spoke. Doors opened for collaborations, lessons, and performances she could never have imagined before. And yet, she remained careful to remember the essence of what had brought her here. The love of music, the joy of expression, and the quiet dedication that had started it all. She never wanted fame or applause to overshadow the purity of her connection with her instrument. One evening, she performed again at a smaller event. This time, the audience was intimate, but their attention was unwavering. As she played, she noticed the subtle reactions. The smiles, the small gasps, the tears welling in eyes. She realized that even without a large crowd, music had the same power to reach hearts, to create a shared experience. The simple act of playing, guided by honesty and emotion, could touch people more profoundly than any words could. After the performance, she stayed back to speak with a few attendees. One older woman shared how the music had reminded her of her childhood, how it had stirred memories she had long forgotten. Another young person admitted that the performance had inspired them to pick up an instrument again. Moments like these reinforced what she had learned. Music was not just performance, but connection. It had the power to heal, to inspire, and to create lasting impact. Through all of this, she continued to grow. She explored different styles, learned new techniques, and challenged herself to push boundaries while staying true to her voice. Each new piece was an opportunity to express herself fully, to create something meaningful, and to touch those listening in ways that went beyond entertainment. The simple tune that had started it all had become a symbol, a reminder that even small beginnings could lead to extraordinary outcomes. As months passed, she reflected often on that first performance. She thought about the nervous anticipation before touching the keys, the way the music had flowed naturally once she let go of fear, and the reaction of the audience. She realized that it was not just her skill that had made the moment special. It was the combination of preparation, passion, and courage. That understanding became the foundation for everything she did afterward. She also began to mentor a few young musicians who were just beginning their journeys. She shared not only technique but also the lessons she had learned about courage, expression, and honesty. She encouraged them to embrace their own unique voices, to take risks, and to find joy in the process of creating. Seeing their growth reminded her of her own journey and strengthened her belief in the transformative power of music. One day, she received an invitation to perform at a large event with an audience she had only dreamed of reaching. The offer was exciting, but it also carried pressure. She thought back to the first time she had been told to play a simple tune, to the doubts and hesitations she had felt. And she realized that the key to success had always been the same: sincerity, passion, and letting the music speak for itself. She accepted the invitation, confident that she could rise to the occasion. As the event approached, she practiced diligently but joyfully. She explored ways to make each note count, to express emotion fully, and to connect with the audience without needing words. She remembered that her music had the power to inspire and move people, and she wanted to honor that truth in every performance. Finally, the day arrived. The hall was grand, filled with people whose attention could have been intimidating. But she felt calm, grounded, and ready. As she sat at the piano, she took a deep breath and let her fingers glide over the keys. The music flowed naturally, as it always did when she allowed herself to be guided by passion and emotion. The audience responded immediately. Their attention was rapt, their expressions a mix of awe, surprise, and delight. She felt the connection between herself and the crowd, the invisible bond that music could create. Each note, each chord, each pause was a conversation with them, a shared experience that transcended words. By the end of the performance, the applause was thunderous. Standing ovations, cheers, and tears of joy filled the hall. She realized once again that her music had reached people in a way that nothing else could. The simple tune that had started her journey had become a symbol of courage, expression, and the power of following one's heart. Walking off the stage, she smiled quietly, knowing that this was not the end. It was a continuation of a journey that had started with simplicity, had grown through courage, and had been sustained by passion. She understood that her music was not just for herself. It was for everyone who needed to hear it, to feel it, and to be moved by it. In that moment, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had taken something small, something simple, and transformed it into something extraordinary. She had discovered her voice, her power, and her ability to touch hearts. And she knew that this was only the beginning of a lifelong journey, one where music, honesty, and courage would continue to guide her every step of the way. Her story, which began with a simple request, had grown into a testament to the human spirit. It was about taking risks, embracing one's talent, and allowing passion to guide action. It was a reminder that even the smallest beginnings could lead to extraordinary results when approached with sincerity and courage. As she looked at the piano, now silent, she felt gratitude for the journey, for the music, and for the people who had witnessed it. She understood that her role was not just to perform, but to inspire, to connect, and to share the joy of creation. And with that understanding, she was ready to continue, ready to play, ready to touch hearts again and again, knowing that music had no limits, and neither did she.